Garm had buried his father on Windy Mountain, and, grieving, had raised a cairn of grey stones over his grave. After that, in spite of the promise Garm had made to Stig to stay safely home and become Clack's next woodcutter, Garm had left to seek Harga, his mother. His hand strayed inside his shirt to the stone that hung about his neck from a leather thong. Harga's rune, the magic charm his mother had left with him when she'd disappeared the day of his birth. Feeling its faint vibrations under his hand, he put it to his ear, but heard nothing. All his life the stone had remained silent, save for that last moment by his father's grave, when there had come from the rune such beautiful humming as had filled Garm with wonder. His eyes still tight shut, he pictured the lonely pile of stones above the town. It would be days before anyone could get up there because of the snow. Even for him, that last trip down the icy trail had been perilous, and no one knew that trail as well as he, now that Stig was dead. At that thought, grief welled up afresh within him, catching at his throat. Turning, Garm looked back to the far horizon over which night was falling fast. Even after only a few hours travelling, Garm had lost sight of the peak that had been his home for all his life. And why not? Hadn't Hoot Owl told him that Windy Mountain was but a pimple on the great face of the world? Somewhere back in that twilight, the townsfolk were drawing curtains and lighting lamps. Hoot Owl was waking up to hunt, while Stig... His breath became a sob. Father, oh, father. He stared through a blur toward his distant home, feeling desolate and alone. Alone? Not entirely. A sudden gust reminded him of Wind, old friend of uncertain temper, Wind who over the years had brought him whiffs of the sea and scents from far away. Now that very Wind blew in his face, whipping his hair, snatching his breath. "Stir yourself or freeze," it urged. "On your way." Still fingering the rune, feeling the familiar lines criss-crossing the smooth black stone, and the tiny knobs and whorls that held the power of Harga's name, Garm turned away from the darkening mountains and stumbled on toward the radiant peaks ahead, over winter grass and brake, until the sun set and the ground glowed with its own luminescence. He began to look about him in the twilight for a suitable resting place. It was almost too dark to see where he trod, when he finally came across a little stream beside a stand of spindly alder hung with vines. He leaned his staff against a tree and pulled some of the vines down behind him to make a windbreak. Then he groped around for what dead and brittle branches he could find in that poor light. Some of the tinder he set aside, and piled the rest like a tiny cornstalk in front of his makeshift shelter. Fishing out his tinder box, he struck a spark against the dusty kindling, where it